Twilight Struggle. There is almost an inherent conflict between the competitive game and the great story of a game that exists in war games and simulations and such. And I think Twilight Struggle is a good highlight of that. One of the last things I was saying in my rap is that I didn't have an idea of what happened, what went wrong, how the story developed. I'm too focused on the competitive, even playing solitaire, on the competitive aspect of playing these cards, trying to figure out, trying to constantly be optimizing what I'm doing, figuring out that best move, the impulse, the quick switching, all that. These are all things that make for a fine competitive game. And they tend to be things that show up in the games that people love to play when they're sitting down at a table against an opponent, someone where they really want to be focusing on the game and on winning the game. That's not to say that there's no social aspect or anything to that. It's just to say that there are some players for whom that is what they desire most. And this is a game that is obviously outstanding for that. It wouldn't have the rating it did. It wouldn't have the rank that it does at BGG if that wasn't the case. And it also wouldn't probably leave me kind of feeling like, geez, why did I play that? I didn't get a story out of it. On the other hand, when you do play it opposed, and even in the solitaire, there is this tension. I mean, I feel the tension in the solitaire game. I feel the, oh my god, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with these cards? These are horrible. Or, oh wow, this is a good combination. I can use this against him. He'll never expect this. I can get all of that. That's just not why I'm into gaming. And CDGs, with their almost enforced pulse actions, with their hidden information, they play right to this, don't they? And they also play to the, I can't stand back, view the whole thing, and get kind of this snapshot image of the story as it's going on in the same way. You can watch my video and you can see how I played through it, and maybe be living in it at that moment. Maybe your memory is better than mine. Maybe you're an expert at Twilight Struggle, and you can always, like an expert Go player. And honestly, I'm no expert Go player, but I remember how things develop in Go better than I do in Twilight Struggle. But I've played a lot more Go. But it develops in a way that seems to tell a story to me. It tells a story of the deployment of troops on a battlefield. Twilight Struggle does not. Twilight Struggle develops as a set of playing cards and trying to achieve little surprises on your opponent. It just doesn't stick in my head in the same way. And I think most of the CDGs have that issue where the story becomes too disjointed because the map isn't fixed in a certain way. It's more a matter of, I don't know, these rapid little actions in one area or another. You don't get sort of that grand impression of what's going on. Something like, I love Here I Stand. And don't get me wrong, I like Twilight Struggle. I've grown to like it more over the years, and I'm not sure what these reviews really are. They're philosophizing about the game, perhaps. It's something like Here I Stand I really love, but even there, I don't know how I got from point A to point B through the course of the game. It's much harder than if I play Europa Universalis, or than if I play Armada, where the board's kind of laid out and things are moving in a sense that seems more rational to me. I think that's kind of one of the points, and especially here with this kind of, I'm engaging all over the globe, it's much harder. I can't draw a map in my mind of, I control this and you control that. It becomes a a much more fluid sort of thing. And that may be fine, that may not. It's not an issue of it. It's not an issue against the gameplay of it. What it is an issue against something that I find very valuable in games. At the end of my rap, I was also talking about this as a bookend to my CDG experience. This is the first one that I started with. It was first, if you look at my old coverage, back then nobody was doing these for war games, and very few people for anything else. You had your Tom Vassell, you had your old Scott Nicholson stuff, but Board Game Blogger had done a Twilight Struggle, and he came out a little earlier than I was in general. And, it helped convince me to play the game, to see the video of it. And now there's like 5 pages of videos. Some of them other playthroughs, most of them reviews, and for whatever reason unboxings. How many unboxings do you ever need? But they get the most happiness, because that's what people want to see. They want to see 3 minutes, no insight, just show me the pieces. Show me the rules is the next thing, because I can't figure them out. You don't get that much from me. I go over the rules, but it's useless to anyone. So, not that this is useful. The CDG, I think, for the whole hobby, has sort of gone into a decline. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm looking at it just through my lens of this. Oh wow! When I came back to the hobby, there was all these new things that I hadn't seen. Stretching back. So there was this, Paths of Glory, all these really hot games, but they're not new, right? They were the ones I knew I didn't like. Your We the People, and I ended up getting Washington's War, hoping it was a little meatier, and it still isn't a war game. And no, this isn't either. Not by my book. This is in there with Cold War and Superpower and Pax Britannica and Britannia and all these other games that have conflict and military aspects, but they're not military simulations. And that's a primary factor to me is something a war game. It has to focus primarily as a military simulation. There are some real close cases. Europa Universalis is one of them. I feel Empires at Arms is more on the military side, but Europa Universalis, with this detailed diplomatic, economic, political systems, etc., how much of that game is really military? But on the other hand, the military that's in there is a war game of greater complexity than most people like to play. All right, going back to this, why is this kind of the bookends of the hobby, and especially since it's just Twilight Struggle on one side, Twilight Struggle on the other, at least from my lens? Like I said, when I first came in, everybody was gung-ho about these CDGs. A lot of less popular ones have come out. Twilight Struggle, Here I Stand, Paths of Glory, and some of the originals, the We the People, Hannibal versus Carthage. Some of the Mark Herman ones that were more like war games, that are war games, however you want to put it, For the People, Empire of the Sun. These had a lot of buzz going around them. I feel like that's decreased a great deal. I feel like the whole discussion, CDGs used to dominate the wargaming forum in discussion. They don't seem to anymore. It seems like OCS is dominating it now. And it has been for a while. I don't know if all the CDG players just said, well, we can't handle this anymore. There's too many thumbs happening for OCS games, and I don't know. We don't like to see Brezhnev nip slips and stuff. I don't know if that's what it is, but it really does seem like that was the hot thing, and it's not anymore. But it caught me up in it, and I said, I gotta try these. I gotta give them another shot. How can something be the #1 game of all games with that mechanic that I saw? Over your Puerto Rico, over, well, I don't know about Agricola. The refreshing farm drink. bought myself a farm game. The farming game is awful. Don't do it. But then things like Labyrinth come out. And Virgin Queen. And they're just not hitting the home run that Twilight Struggle and Here I Stand were hitting. And nothing has made the splash that Paths of Glory did. Now, I'm not a big fan of Paths of Glory, but there's some things that really bother me about it. But these others, the other little incursions into odder eras. So when you see, 30 Years' War, or Manifest Destiny, which is a CDG of a sort of weird type. Things like 1960 didn't catch people the same way as Twilight Struggle, and I suspect it's just not that good a competitive game in the same way, but it's very hard for me to judge competitive games. I'm not the person to go to about that, which is why, geez, why are you even reviewing this? You've already covered it, man. Well, I gave my reasons for that, and I think it does fit. So, there have been a lot that are pushing on. Now, for example, this year, I think there was a fantastic one, last year actually, that came out, which is Kingdom of Heaven. I think it's a very good, lighter war game CDG. But obviously, those just never have the same catch that this does. This has a certain mixture where it's going to be approachable for the non-war gamer. So is 1960. But also provides what I'm guessing has to be a great deal more depth than 1960 does. To me, I don't see it. I see the same mechanisms going on in both. I see that same kind of play to the strength. You see someone getting an advantage somewhere and you play against it just because you don't know what they're going to do with it, what their plans are with it. They feel very much like the same game to me. And 1960 is a little simpler, a little faster, and I like the picture it gives me in my mind better than the one that I get out of this. So in a sense, I kind of wonder if whatever that is that creates that picture in my mind is exactly what is so despised, is a serious negative for your competitive gamer. If there's this dichotomy where the competitive gamer actually is in a position where they do not like the things that are going to create that storyline as much. Now, I like this. I enjoy it. I just don't feel like it presents that story very well. There are other issues here. There's the issue of the fixed events. Hey, the hell with it. That's the CDG buy-in. Once you accept that there are fixed events, that's okay. What about controlling events that your opponent should know about, not you? That's a lot more troubling to me. I'm very disturbed by the fact that I don't feel like playing as the Soviet Union or the US, that I really have a grounding as to who I am. Some of these events are random events. Some of them are otherwise. And now, this tells against something like Paths of Glory, which aims to be a military simulation. Against this game, I think it's a less telling criticism, because I do feel this is more of a game. This is far less any type of simulation, military or otherwise, and far less an experience game. It's not giving you that map in the same way that generates the picture for me. On the other hand, looking again at the bookmark, just to make this jump of total non sequitur, but this is how I ramble. You have something like Labyrinth that came out, and it didn't do quite as well. I mean, it didn't do anywhere near as well as Twilight Struggle has. It's an interesting game. It will never peak to the level that this did. Not necessarily for anything of its own, more for the fact that it wasn't the first of this kind. it's similar enough to Twilight Struggle, and it's a little bit clunkier. So it's not going to be as accessible to the people who don't want to spend a lot of time working on it. But then you have the drive away from the CDG towards newer pastures. You have the Coin series with Andy and Abyss coming out, having come out, and now a whole bunch of games on that series with the hope that that'll kind of replace it. To me, that felt even less connected than these do. So it's kind of worrisome for me because I felt less in touch with what was going on and more like I was playing a game with little cubes. This, I at least feel some tie to what I'm doing here in terms of the influence is a simple enough concept that it really hammers the idea home with me. There's also simple enough systems that you're not constantly looking up rules. A lot of the CDGs, a lot of the military ones especially, they all have some little twist on how you can maneuver and otherwise. It works a lot better when you don't have to deal with maneuvering armies on a point-to-point map, which is just a nightmare to tell you the truth. It's because there's no standardized rules for it. So every game has its own little twist. When you go to the hexagon map or the area maps, usually they all do things more or less the same. There aren't anywhere near as many surprises. It doesn't feel like every game's trying to come out with its own. So what I think this comes out as is really, it's kind of been proven, no, this and Here I Stand in particular are not duplicable. You can't just replicate some pattern here as you do with, trying to do it with Labyrinth, which is a different game, there's no question, but trying to capture on that same kind of feeling. Or Virgin Queen, which some people think is better than Here I Stand, but it's not able to capture on that. It's got a little bit too much stuff in it. And it's just sort of the nature of these things. Now, in no way would I say that the first war games were at all the best war games, and in no way are the first CDGs necessarily the best. I think it reached its sort of, peak with this one in terms of how it's going to be available and approachable to a broad gaming populace. Even though something like We the People was designed for a broad gaming populace, it didn't reach out in the same way. Why? I don't know. I can say it's less interesting to me. It feels even less like a simulation than this does. More focused on a single conflict, though. Components, I always have to talk about them, and I don't think I did in my last one. You've got your designer edition stuff for a GMT game. The cards, reasonable. They wear a little bit. If you're going to play the crap out of this, you probably want to use condoms. The hardboard's awesome, but this is the deluxe version. Got these two separate play aids. And I'm not sure why they're separate. I've tried investigating them. They look exactly the same. One of them is just on paper, the other's on cardstock, and then you've got another pair of the same thing. And I'm a little confused about that. I feel like the paper one probably wouldn't be included if it didn't have some correction in it. The rulebook is, this is not a hard game at all. And I think the 11 pages of rules that it has, well, call it 10, is about right. It's about right. The further what do we got here? Say 10 pages of playthrough. Well, that's helpful to some people. To me, I don't know. That just becomes a waste after you've played it once, and there are online resources for that, but okay. I'm fine. I'm not going to complain too much about wasting the paper on that. The card history is not too useful to me because, well, I'm old enough to at least know most of this stuff to some extent. Maybe I didn't live through a lot of it. The early war stuff, certainly not. And mid-war, mostly not. But this was all, fairly common to a U.S. person of my age. But it may not be so much anymore. For young kids entering the gaming hobby, you can see where some of this may not be, that well remembered. And for people who are not of the United States, it's kind of must be nice to be able to see this. It's definitely that U.S.-Russian conflict view, and all the events are tailored to that. And that's great. All right, let me think about if there's anything I really want to say about the game in particular. So many people have. I like the option for the realignment rolls in the rolls, rather than the base rolls. I think it makes more sense that you be able to destabilize a country using a non-military, non-extreme means of the coup. I think that would be a very different game, though, in a lot of ways. Just because... So the thing is, coups serve so many purposes for you. I stole that from someone, but I really mean it in this sense. When you're playing a coup, you're trying to get your military objectives, you're trying to maybe screw the DEF CON so the other guy's military objectives get totally screwed up. And you're also trying to get your control points in the area. So coups are what you always want to do. Sometimes you don't get a chance to, but being able to do the realignment rolls in a broader area of countries, well, it takes some of the power away from the cards, perhaps, the event cards, and puts more into the player's decisions. It also, I think, is more accurate in terms of a historical perspective, but we could argue that, I'm sure. The thing you're usually doing is placing the influence markers. What about those scorecards? Wow. That's very... And I don't think I got into this too much in my last review. But those are almost... not really. They're very reminiscent of the concept in Summit. Although I don't think those were regional scorecards. You had your regions and you wanted to score... You got bonus points for collecting up a region. But something about that sort of mechanism of like a card coming up that triggers that. But here's the difference. You've got control over it in your hand. And you may be able to manipulate your hand so you can get rid of it. You usually can't. You can't shoot it into space, for example. It also allows you to prepare for it. And that creates this wonderful feeling. This is one of the places where this game really shines, is the, I've got a card in my hand that you don't know about, and I'm preparing for it. And I think 1960 does that just as well. Maybe not as explicitly, but anyhow. That's one of the fun things in the game, where you're sitting on knowledge that the other player doesn't have, that you start to take advantage of. Now, as the other player, you see your opponent doing something, and you don't know what he's doing, but you have to kind of assume the worst. You immediately start assuming, okay, he's just set that region up so he dominates it. I have to respond to that and change things, unless I've got something more important in my own hand to deal with. So you have this kind of changing initiative here, where somebody decides what they're doing is really more important than what the other person is doing. And this is something that real war games so seldom actually capture. This whole feeling of, all right, I can actually ignore what you're doing and take my own initiative to do something. Then it's up to you. Am I bluffing you, or am I going for something that I already have said is more important than what you look like you're doing? Or I could just be saying, I don't believe you. It's this sort of poker game going on with those cards. And poker is a great game. And I think this game actually captures a lot of that, of the bluffing and tension there. in a way that most of the CDGs fail to do. Most of them it's more open on the board what the victory objectives are. Here the victory objectives are hidden in your hand. And I think that's really one of the key aspects that makes this very pleasing. It manages to mix a high level of strategic decision making, etc., as to how to get to the objectives you have. Much more detail than, say, some other games that I can think of that have kind of this secret placement type thing. I'm thinking Caesar and Cleopatra, a little card game that I covered a while back, has that very, you hold some idea in your head. You know what I could say, though? Medici, another little card game, captures a lot of this. That would be something I'd suggest taking a peek at. If you don't look at my coverage of it, you can look at Joel Eddy's coverage, which is a lot cleaner and clearer, as of all things. I'm the person you go to when you want to sit and have a drink and kind of babble with. Not someone who's here to give you your most direct route to the information you're looking for. But you might gain something you won't see anywhere else. No, you might. I know that a number of people have seemed to find something in my babbling. I think it's just because I say so much. I've often noticed this where people think I've said something that I didn't say, and they read into it and think, oh man, that's a brilliant idea, and I get blamed for it. Sometimes I do have good ideas and good thoughts, but a lot of times it's just my stream of consciousness, and people can tap into it and refine and pull something of use out of it, or whatever. So yeah, I've walked away from the CDGs largely. I'm not hunting them down the way I once was. When I first started looking, people were telling me, oh, these are the great ones. You know, you're unhappy King Charles. You want to get all the Mark Herman stuff. You want to get, I already had the Paths of Glory, this Here I Stand, but was looking at the others, and I found some that I really enjoyed the play of, but I also found quite a few that they're good enough. They're good enough games, but I actually think that in general the style, the whole mechanism has kind of played itself out for me. And then when I look on the boards, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of people who were into them are kind of either dropping off the boards, that's a possibility, or more likely there's just less discussion about them, there's less interest. The people who are maybe not absolute fans of it have kind of shifted away. Or maybe there aren't people like me anymore coming in saying, yo, what's up with these CDGs? I've got lots of CDGs. I got War of the Ring. I got And yeah, I mean, you know, there is a distinctive mechanism to these. It provides certain aspects of play which I find not just the hidden movement, the hidden aspect, but in other ways, the pulsing, especially games with lots of interrupts. That's one thankful thing about Twilight Struggle. For a solitaire game, I don't have to be constantly looking at both hands. Over on Labyrinth, I have to worry about that all the time, and that makes it a tough game to solo. Because it's very easy for me to forget what my hand is. It's not very easy for me to constantly remember what it is. I have to be looking at it all the time. What if I were playing opposed? This is very good opposed. I think other games, again, with the interrupts, I'm always forgetting to play those damn things. I have trouble with them in Magic. I have trouble with them in Labyrinth. I have trouble with them in a lot of games that have. The control level on this feels, it's such a huge scope. It's such broad strokes that the game is expressed in, that in a sense I don't really mind being God, or the God of the US or USSR, rather than feeling like I'm actually the CIA, KGB, or chief political strategists for foreign policy or whatever. Because I don't feel like I'm in any human role in this game. I have too much control over too many weird things. You know, oh yeah, if we send a rocket to the moon, Castro won't lead his revolt. What? Yeah, I mean, they're just unconnected. There's this, so this is where I would actually say thematic disconnect, because it's not just like the events in Paths of Glory, which kind of feel a little wrong that I should be able to play them. Here, it just feels like the whole system is just this weird, gamey thing, much like Geronimo. So in the end, yeah, I think it can only really be judged as a game. I'm probably not the best person to do that. I enjoy it as a game. I enjoy playing Monopoly as a game, though. For whatever that's worth, I think it's a hell of a game, actually, but especially given when it was and everything that came from it. But yeah, I'm hoping somebody takes some enjoyment out of this playthrough, because I took a little bit, but I didn't really need to do another one on Twilight Struggle, I don't think, except to provide that sort of end note that I'm seeing and that I keep coming back to here. Cheers.